Hi, everybody. I haven't seen that in a long time. A continuation of media clips, I guess. I'm Jim Shelberg, Pig Game Journal, and I just want to say a minute here. I've been trying to get this to happen for probably 10, 12 years now, and it's just I have to say, it's really exciting for me. Of course, the sticking point was Suzanne, because she would never come here. And I kept asking her and every year. And I mean, one year she had to go score a movie on Mother Teresa instead of I said, you know, there's a balance. I mean, you know, Mother Teresa at Pinball Expo, it's like a hard thing to do. But she said, keep asking her, and you never know, she'll accept it. She did this year, and Tom Nieman was gracious enough to fly in from Vegas, and the other two guys are here, but anyway, they just had to drive. The three guys are here, sorry. So that's all. I just want to say that I'm happy about this. And you're my moderator, famous pinball historian Gary Flower.
Good evening, everyone.
Hey, Gary.
Well, we've got a lot to pack into the next hour. We're going to devote it totally to the making of Xenon. We have a very stellar cast. I'm just going to set some background and tell you that the game design process started in about the end of '79, and the game finally made it onto the streets towards the end of 1980. I think 11,000 units were made in total. So without further ado, I'd like to bring on the stars of the show one at a time. I'm going to start with Greg Kmiec. Can you come up, please? Greg's background. As a designer at Bally. Allan, can you join us, please? Allan was an engineer at Bally. Did some very interesting stuff in the MT department, which is new technology, if you have a chance to talk to him later. And Tom, can you join us, please? Tom had been with Bally a few years by the time this project started, and I think your title was Vice President of Marketing?
I don't remember.
And finally, Suzanne. Sorry, Paul's responsible for the stunning artwork on this game. That's great. And Suzanne has made it over here from the West Coast. Suzanne is going to tell us how she did the sound and speech. So I think that's the introductions. Tom, can I hand over to you now to get into a level of detail about how this project all started?
Sure.
There's a microphone down here.
That's how it works. Thank you, Gary. Good evening, everyone. My name's Tom Nieman. My association with this at the time, I was responsible for a lot of the marketing and all the licensing at Bally Pinball. As some of you may know, we had started off not knowing what the hell we were doing when we were going out and getting licenses, starting with Pinball Wizard, Captain Fantastic, and on and on and on, Legal, etc. Xenon is an unusual opportunity because it was a game that didn't come with an immediate brand identity. We didn't have a movie, we didn't have a celebrity, we didn't have a rock star or whatever behind it. So it's an original game. What we did have is the star of another kind. Instead of buying a brand in what we refer to as the first quarter, when we put out those big branded games and had so much success, simple to get the first quarter. It took guys like Greg Kmiec and the playfield designers to get the second quarter, the third quarter. It took artists like Paul Faris and his entire staff that had this dramatic artwork that blended with those licensed games and truly delivered the sense of the persona or whatever the brand license was. With Xenon, unique. we didn't have that instant identity. So we didn't have that first quarter feature. To bring that to life was the concept of, beyond doing it visually, what can we do with sounds? And in those days, it was a very crude stage, sound-wise. We had a firm that we did a great deal of promotional work with. A firm that was called The Response Group, TRG, out of New York City. They worked with me on a few different projects. I don't know if anyone remembers our attempt at a World Pinball Championship that we did at the Playboy Towers. And I'm not even sure what the year of it was, but worked with TRG. And so I was on the phone with them quite a bit, looking for and trying to create new promotional ideas and concepts. We were into this subject of audio and sound and what's going on, and it was TRG that introduced me to the name Suzanne Ciani. And they gave me some very preliminary contact information. And at some point I reached out, called Suzanne's office, and was fortunate enough to get a call back. I guess the concept of, I mean, here's someone doing movie soundtracks and Grammy-nominated music, and I'm talking about a pinball machine. Well, we were very, very fortunate enough, and I think at that point in time in American culture, pinball was hot. It was a pre-video revolution. And so the idea of pinball, which was clear because I'm still not sure why people like Evil called me back, of course, Elvis, I've chased them all as I went down my fantasy list of who I wanted to meet. And most of them called back with some level of interest. So Suzanne and her office did respond. I reached out, contacted. We had a preliminary discussion on what we were thinking of. And things all sort of come together from various points. You've got whiteboards in development, Greg and his group doing their thing, Paul always having ideas about artwork and directions to go. You know, one might think that the artist always wanted to have the next big licensed game, but the reality of it is a game like XENON truly let them be creative. It gave them a blank canvas and allowed them to create what their image was. So Paul had some ideas, and Paul and I talked constantly about what's next, where we go, what we do. And this meeting in New York City with Suzanne came up, and I flew out there, and the very first meeting with Suzanne, her studio was her apartment. And you know, Midwestern Chicago kid goes into the big city, and I found it. And we had this great meeting, and since I had called her, she had gone out to do her own market research. She had gone to the Broadway arcade and watched players and to see what was going on in the games at that point, at that stage. And then, of course, let her do her thing, her creativity of where could I take it, what direction could I go in. And so that was all these elements coming together, from dramatic whiteboard, some thoughts about themes, and Paul always had in his vision how he would carry out a theme. And it was, if I remember correctly, it was Paul who named it. I remember him coming to me with this name XENON. And I said, well, what the hell's a XENON? And that's when I discovered it's a gas. And it was a gas, if I remember, it was a gas that was used in neon. And I think the neon and the tube and everything played together, but I'm sure these people can explain it much more. All I stood back is let very smart, creative, talented people do very smart, creative, and talented things. And I was brilliant enough never to get in their way, just to say yes. And that's what my meeting with Suzanne was like in New York, where she talked to me about what they did, and she tried to explain to me how she created the song and sounds. And I'm a marketing guy. I have no idea what she said. How she did it, how it works, was way beyond me, but I just could tell this was someone who was incredibly talented. Yes, you could look at her resume and see this is a person with an unbelievable amount of skills and talent. And again, my brilliance was getting out of her way and saying yes to everything she wanted to do. So with that, I guess that sets it up, and I don't know where you want me to point it to.
Can I hand over to Greg now? Can you tell us about how you went about designing the playfield, please?
Want to Susie's?
Yeah. Fine.
Well, very briefly, I'll run through the story of Xenon as a whitewood. I was walking through a store one day and I saw a cylindrical plastic tube about 4 feet in length. And I picked it up and I said, wouldn't this be kind of cool to have a pinball go through here? At the time, all the games were single level. So I spent the weekend back at Bally tearing apart a cabinet and lowering a playfield 3 or 4 inches to accommodate the tube over the playfield. And after that, the initial name of the game was called Sabre Dance, where you have the xenon lights in the center. We, at the time, were always using white or yellow inserts, and we were always chasing Williams at the time because they were snazzing up their games. So I decided to use amber, which historically was used for extra ball, and blue, which transparent, which was kind of historically used for double bonus. So I just threw them in the playfield where the game was called Sabre Dance. And when I was done with the whitewood playfield, still called Sabre Dance, it was approved for percentaging, and at that point, the game was given to the art department, still called Sabre Dance. And that's when Paul got his hands on it, and the rest is history. So that's my contribution.
Thanks very much, Greg. So I guess, Paul, it turns up at the art department. What happens next?
Well, I remember when I went in and looked at the whitewood, initially I was, this was such a futuristic looking game with this tube on it. We hadn't seen anything quite like that before. And I don't remember this exactly correctly chronologically, but I don't remember if we knew for sure that this was going to have the female voice yet. I think we were still, that was being discussed, and it was a great idea, but it wasn't even going to be able to happen. So I kind of looked at the playfield first and came up with just a very futuristic city or civilization. I didn't try to be, sometimes when we had a non-licensed game, we would kind of create our own mythology for the game. So when I did Paragon, I had a whole storyline in mind of the characters. And so I didn't have so much of that with Xenon because it was, we were still kind of evolving it. But I just wanted to capture this very futuristic looking graphics. Then when we knew it was going to be a female voice and it was blessed to go. And I heard Suzanne's voice and coming with some of the sounds that she had created. I wanted to create this the Xenon woman, and because again we decided to put an infinity box treatment on the back glass that we had used in the game prior to that in Space Invaders to give it sort of a snazzy, sort of futuristic effect, and also to kind of create the illusion of the tube to kind of accentuate that. And after. But then by doing the infinity effect, you don't have a lot of extra room to do. I used to love to put a lot of artwork in the glasses, and there really isn't that much room to do it. So what I wanted to do was create this very highly evolved woman of Xenon. And this was, quite a few years ago, as you all know. But my vision was this 8 foot tall, blue skinned woman with large eyes. This is way before Avatar. But the one thing I wanted to make sure was clear was we used to sometimes get a little grief from a variety of people about having women on our games that were sort of in subservient roles and sort of, and so I wanted there to be no mistaking that Xenon woman was not a subservient woman, but she had this wonderful voice, and the author right next to me, it was just spectacular. So that was really the whole key, was just trying to come up with a woman. It's not any particular people. I've been known to use other people as my models. In this case, it was just from my head. But they sort of highly evolved, highly intelligent, large woman that would utter these wonderful sounds was my plan.
How I described Suzanne.
Yeah, that's exactly what you said she looked like when you came back from New York. No. So that was my, again, that was my contribution. But I have to be honest and pay props to Greg. When I went in and saw that white one, I definitely wanted to do the artwork on it. And this was before, sometimes you'd have to assign games to certain artists as they became available, and we were doing a lot of games at the time. But that one I really didn't want to do, and the fact that it would have its own theme to it, its own storyline, and then it became even more interesting as this became the first talking female game. So I love that game, and the way the game plays is certainly extremely important. But I love working on the package too. So
Thank you very much, Paul. Can I go back to you, Greg, and ask you about the multi-ball feature on that game?
Okay, so the artwork's done, the game's complete as a single ball game. And we're playing it as a single ball game, we're percentaging it. And you'll notice that these lights that talk about multi-ball and the multi-ball capture, if there's a ball in here, the switch had to be added. This was all done after the artwork was done, after the fact. So the story about that is, artwork's done, we're percentaging the game as a single ball game. My friend Allan Reizman, who worked in the electronics department, everybody went out to lunch, and Allan stayed in, and he threw 2 balls on the playfield just to see what it was like, and I'll let him pick up the story from there.
Thanks for that. What he doesn't tell you is I've been trying to get multi-ball in the games for 2 years. I would field a lot of calls from, at that time, collecting games was in its infancy. I would get a call from a lot of collectors saying, how do I get my 4 million BC working? How do I get my Fireball? Everybody wanted those games because they were the original multi-balls. We had just gone away from that technology. So I did that with every game that came into the lab. Wait till nobody was around. Yeah, what would happen if I put a second ball in play? Oh, look at that. And they'd come back from lunch and they'd go, get out of here. That ball off the field. Well, in the case of XENON, it actually played better as a multi-ball game. I had it in the lab, and I was doing some work on the sound. We were finishing up the sound, trying to get the old Talking Kiss sound system compressed into something cellular. So I was testing that out, and I was around, put the second ball in play. Hey, this is great. I'm sitting there playing it, and some of the other engineers go and say, hey, this is cool, let me have a shot at that. And there comes Greg in, and I grab him, and I say, hey, check this out. He looks at it, oh, that's pretty good. He disappears, comes back with, did you come back with Tom or Norm? All of a sudden, before I know it, all the engineers are scrambling. We got to reprogram the software. We got to put all these new assemblies in. We got to make this a multi-ball game because this Reizman guy just suddenly put a second ball on the playfield, and darn it actually plays better. And that was how that came about. We did that, I think, in a weekend. We made that transition over the weekend because the game was due to go to production like in the next couple of weeks.
The game was already done?
Yep.
Thanks, Allan. Susan, can I ask you a question? When you first saw the game, at what stage was its development?
As I recall, I went to Chicago, and I went to the Bally office, factory, headquarters, and I was taken around to the various departments. I remember being taken to the art department, and of course being a woman, I was a little bit like aghast at the image of the female that was portrayed in most pinball games. It's a kind of a man's world, and but it was fine. I adapted. I mean, over the years, I've really learned to appreciate what that world was, and especially being here just for this convention and sharing with all of you, the total passion that goes on in this field, and your attention to detail and history and the whole organic evolution of this world, this very special world. I have a new appreciation after all this time, really, of what was going on then. At that time, it was the first time I'd ever seen anything like it. I didn't know what I was seeing. I remember seeing drawings, and I said, what, this is art? I didn't know. what it was. And then I went back at a certain point to work with the sound programmer. Yeah, where they were going to come in and what point. And, you know, everybody was so clear. You know, the reason that I was able to do what I did coming in from, you know, left field, so to speak, was that, you know, I was in the hands of people who communicated very clearly what was needed. And, you know, I didn't know about all the levels of gratification, you know, that went on, and how you had to build the emotions and rewards. I mean, my pinball playing never got past, you know, the very lowest stage. So I never got to any of those higher levels. I didn't know they were there. So that they were very gentle with me and told me how it, you know, had to go. And so I got all the support I needed to do that. I adapted, right? I adapted. And, you know, they, as Tom said, I mean, the beauty is that he did give creative freedom. And to me, this is the most important thing. Because when you're working from your gut, and you're working from your instinct, and you're just coming from the excitement of creation, you don't want something that comes in the way of that and short-circuits it in any way. And he, you know, was a perfect person to work for, because he allowed all the, you know, my natural ideas to kind of just come forth. It also helps that when you're working in the field that I worked in, a lot of people don't understand it anyway, you know, so you have a lot of freedom, because it's like, you know, you dazzle them with the wires and the, you know, and the computers. And so, you know, I was always lucky in New York to have freedom in the work I did. But did I answer the question?
You did, very eloquently.
Okay.
Can I ask you now, don't put the microphone down, I'm going to ask you to now go on to the next level of detail and tell us how you went about developing the sounds, and perhaps you can use the equipment to demonstrate that.
Oh, yeah. Well, first I'd like to just say that, you know, as a composer, I always think analytically about the architecture and the structure and all the elements of sound and composition. So when you have a background sound, and it has to endure for a long time, you want to make something that is, you know, not too static. And that's why, it's funny, last night, Chris Grammer was giving a talk, and he was telling about how he had discovered this diminished chord, and that he used that in a lot of his sound. Well, I actually used that also instinctively. I used a tritone relationship because it made it a little bit less stable and gave a momentum to the background sound. Then my idea was, as also Chris noticed, is that what's happening in the pinball game is that the composition is being created in the process of playing. So you want sounds that are going to add to each other and overlap in musical ways. And so the other sounds are all designed to fit, you know, architecturally with that bottom sound. So harmonically, melodically, rhythmically, whatever. So you get this sense of a wholeness when you're playing the game. It's a complete sound environment, as opposed to something that's like attacking you from different directions. So that was my thought process. I went back and forth with Bally on a bunch of sounds. And do you really want to hear some of those sounds? I mean, okay.
While Suzanne's getting ready, if I can just mention a couple of things. Suzanne mentioned the software guy she was working with. I believe, gentlemen, that would have probably been Reizman Merchant. Is that correct? Right. And in fact, in the video that was playing before we started talking, you see him placing the sound chip into the game. So there's one item for you. And just, I guess, to put this into a historical context, compared to where we are today, I'm going to guess that in that year, sort of 79, 80, Bally, Williams and Godley combined probably brought out maybe a dozen different games. And this particular game sold 11,000 units. In the last 12 months, I would bet money the industry hasn't made 12,000 units on of pinball. So just in one game, 11,000 units, more than a year's production for the last 12 months. Have we got any questions while Suzanne's getting ready? Dave?
I need help with recalling a bit of pop culture from the time, because that was right about the time when I think there was a famous nightclub in New York called XENON. That was supposed to be the next thing after Studio 54. Does anyone recall that?
I can tell you that there was...
Suzanne remembers it. There was a XENON club, and I don't remember the timing relative to this game, but it was a fortunate thing for the game that became a hot club.
More fortunate for the club.
More fortunate.
There was no Google back then, so you just made up a name and you crossed your fingers and nobody else had it first. Today you would probably go on the internet, type it into Google and see who else has it.
I can mention also there was a XENON club in London at the time as well.
Okay. That was,
The alternative name was Avatar. The name never worked. Never come.
giant Kool-Aid,
Oh, boy.
Suzanne, wasn't there a sound added to the game that a male voice added?
Oh, yeah. I mean, and now that we're all together here, 30-some years later, I've always wondered why there was that male voice that said, "Enter XENON," you know, because there was one, I mean, I was going, "Welcome to XENON," you know, and then there was this very dry male voice that would enter XENON, and Tom doesn't even know where that came from, do you?
No, I thought it was part of the original package.
No.
I was aware that it was not your pen.
Yeah.
I don't know who would have had access
Yeah.
to the master file to do the programming.
That's a mystery that somebody has to
My
uncover.
sister did.
Right. Somebody, I always thought it was Tom. But I just had, you know, I found, I went into my vault and I found just some old tape boxes that said XENON sounds. And I have some of those here, and I'm not sure if these, I think a lot of these were outtakes, some of them were used. By the way, I want to tell you, you know, you saw that video, the film that was made, a documentary about my work in this game. And it opens up with working at an instrument called a synclavier. This was a $200,000, you know, early digital instrument that I used to replicate this 15-cent chip, you know? And that's what it took. I mean, I did a lot of jobs with the synclavier. I did a sound that AT&T is still using for the telephone. And I could go in with that instrument and, you know, extract frequencies, you know, that would have triggered numbers on the telephone. I mean, it's very surgical what you can do with that, what I could do with that instrument. I don't have it anymore. But at that time, I had the luxury, because I talked to, you know, Chris last night, and he was saying how he had to work, you know, by typing in numbers, waiting for the thing to process, and then listening. And I was able to, with this machine that I had, really just define the parameters that were available to me, and then just work within that frame instantly. So it was kind of a luxury that I had at that time.
What's the name of the machine?
It was called a synclavier, S-Y-N-C-L-A. It was made by New England Digital, yeah, in Vermont, and then yeah, and they're kind of, yeah, Dartmouth College, which is a center for digital. The other advantage I had was that I had studied computer music with Max Matthews, who is the father of computer music, and I went to Stanford. for a whole semester working with Max and John Chowning, who is the fellow that, you know, came upon frequency modulation as we know it in musical instruments. So I had a good background for understanding chip level work. You know, today the whole world is different. I don't think you have to maximize, you know, as much as you did then, and I really liked that challenge. You know, for me, because I had a high-tech mentality, being challenged was, you know, with the forefront and being on the very edge. That was where I like to live, you know. I wanted to do the first of everything. So here are a couple of other sounds. Another thing that I just, you know, that I realized in listening back to some of these sounds is that, you know, when you play pinball, it's always this up and down. The ball goes up, the ball comes down. You know, it's this kind of pulsing motion, and the sounds, you know, all reflect that. They're either kind of going up or they're coming down, or, you know, the background is more steady. So I think that the shape of the sounds is definitely something that's, you know, a DNA for pinball. I don't think that one was used. No.
I get it from my phone.
That one was used, yeah. That was the tilt, okay.
Suzanne, we have a question from the panel for you.
How's this? They're shooting at you from the front and the back. For someone who lived in what I would envision as such a structured, analytical world, the chaos or the randomness of a pinball machine never plays the same way twice.
Right.
Every ball, the patterns, the movement, there's no way to know this sound's going to follow this sound or this sound's going to build on this sound. With the randomness, and I'll use that word, once you went into the arcade, saw this randomness take place, was that at all troubling? Was it a challenge? Is it unique from the world that you lived in, or ultimately it's consistent with the world that you were living in, the more structured music, soundtrack world?
No, it was unique. It was a challenge. It was wonderful. It was a whole new compositional paradigm. You know, to have a composition that was generated randomly.
User generated.
Yeah, user
Which sound
generated.
was going to follow was based on how did you move the ball.
Yeah, no, it's a wonderful approach to piece. But you know, for years before, I mean, before I did this commercial work, I had years as a pure artist where I was playing live electronic music with a buchla. So it was a non-keyboard instrument with knobs and dials, and you would perform by doing a choreography of movements and patching. So you were live patching of these modules. So it was a modular synthesizer. And they still exist today, and there's actually, you know, kind of a renaissance now. The kids are very excited about those early analog modular instruments. So, you know, that world was a little bit chaotic and pure electronic. And was my instrument. So that was the one. Oh. Xenon. I don't think we use that. Xenon. No. Xenon.
This one before you stroke was crazy. Hold it
I don't think we use that. No.
Was that last sound representing what you said on the film about male voice?
Yes.
Can you play it one more time?
Yes. Let me just go back a little, please. Let's see where it is. So I had something called a voice box, which was, you see it in that movie, it was a horizontal cabinet with a lot of rack-mounted units that were all connected, and I could very quickly, it was all for voice processing, but I had compressors and filters and harmonizers and vocoders and all kinds of gadgets for modulating my voice. And so this particular thing was done with an Eventide harmonizer. And I actually have one of those here. I don't know if this is going to work there. Let me see. Are we on? Let me see.
Hello? Hi. Yes, I know. Well, it's hard to be in a man's world. Sometimes I just don't feel they understand me. This is actually Steve. And I actually have my own recording career. And I hope you'll listen to some of it later. And then, but with this, for instance,
That's my helium voice. I know, I'm so shy. But anyway.
Yeah, but you have to do these things with a degree of here's the other thing about making sounds that are going to last. They do have to be kind of perfect, so you can't just toss them off. I mean, you really have to polish them the same way they polished everything else in this machine. The artwork, all the gaming, the programming, everything was done, with that kind of something that would last.